Good afternoon. I'm here. I had a few technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi and a system I'm using, but I am here to discuss what's been on my mind throughout the entire week. Um, I'm going to wait a little bit for somewhat of a crowd, and my apologies for not having a scheduled stream either. It was kind of a last-minute notice deal with the Trump rally and me being very busy. So we're back to the normal procedure until I figure out how to do regular webcam stream with XSplit. So there won't be any chat popping up, but I can see the chat on YouTube. So I will be able to comment with your comments if you vibe with anything I'm talking about. So today is going to be an interesting discussion because it's Father's Day. And fathers really are in great demand. Uh, I was watching, what is it called? Hallmark or Lifetime downstairs with my folks for Father's Day. And every single movie, this is such an agenda, every single movie was like killer dad or cheating dad or psychopath dad. There's no hero dad, there's nothing like that. Or you know boring dad, stupid dad. And I think that's kind of a good start as to where I'm trying to go with this, because it seems to me that I can't really quantify exactly when it started. I would wager to guess in the 60s when the whole hippie movement started, but the seeds may have been planted, but maybe even before then. Thomas and I will be discussing how we got to the craziness we see in our culture. I mean, the nuttiness, like with these kids in Seattle trying to run their own country and failing miserably. I'm pretty sure the thing's going to implode by the time any police finally have enough, or any other people finally have enough and retake that place. But I'm going to be merciful to those guys because I'm a millennial and I understand the thirst, the absolute thirst for meaning and purpose, and the loneliness that younger generations experience. I'm a sinner too, and I'm messed up too. I'm just privileged to have an experience of something infinitely deep. And so, yeah, I'm kind of like the surfer guy. I'm just like, whoa, hey guys, what's going on? It's me, the guy who prays all the time. And I guess that's what I have, and I'm just privileged. But what I'm going to get into is to try to explain the cultural entertainment sphere of younger people and what's going on there. And also, if there's anyone that isn't of that age, maybe this can help you understand why this is happening. For anyone that's listening that is of my age, I hope that I can help you transfer energy. Okay. The best form of doing anything better for you psychologically or spiritually is to transfer energy to something better, not hate yourself for it, or not, beat yourself up for no good reason. That's what I truly believe. So, um, I think that where this all started, this idea of superheroes and, vigilante justice, this has been, the idea of a hero or even a superhero has actually been from ancient times. Um, and outside of the demigods and the superheroes there, you had just military heroes, especially during the times where they didn't have guns. So you would have more examples of like a heroic, powerful, strong man, overpowering something else, coming to save the day, the chivalry in the Middle Ages. And of course, even before the Middle Ages, there were plenty of heroes on the battlefield, Leonidas, right? Um, but then came the modern century, and there were vigilantes. We're going to be talking again on Utopiana about how some of the things we think are really new actually aren't. So the first vigilantes that really affect modern society that led us to superheroes were the deputized cowboys of the Wild West. Okay, and these were real people. With the Second Amendment, things and the promulgation of guns, the privatization of guns, where people could just buy a gun, which started around the Enlightenment time, a little bit before that, changed everything. Before that was the crossbow, that was considered the peasant's weapon. But the idea that someone now has the power to take matters into their own hands and do something about it with as long as they know how to aim right, even a kid could defend themselves from a wild animal or some kind of, I don't know, some other tribe coming over the hill, or a robber. That changed the way we thought. Okay, that whole dynamic made us believe in that there's an onus on the citizen, on the normal person, to be a protector and provider. Um, Especially the men. And this is why fathers are so important. This idea that maybe anyone can be a hero. Now, what happened later was that spirit continued into the late 1800s and the early 20th century with the abolition movement. You had Al Capone, you had organized crime, um, and with that came the first, gun wielding detectives. Now, there's always been gun wielding detectives. Sherlock Holmes was really the first, but there were actual Sherlock Holmes developing because now there were people that were smarter and more organized, that were doing crime because of the smuggling going on, the organized crime, and that produced the first comic books. That was basically, it was before I was born. This is the 1910s, 20s. If you know the radio show The Shadow. All right, he was very, and then there's also another one, Tracy. I keep forgetting his last name. Tracy something. Dick Tracy. Okay, Dick Tracy came right after The Shadow. The Shadow. Hey, Thomas, good to have you here. The Shadow was a radio show where this detective would use his ventriloquy mixed with his martial arts skills. He was pretty experienced there, and his gun accuracy mixed with his detective work. And sometimes he was so good at ventriloquy and hypnotism, he could scare the criminals in the alleyway, and he could give them illusions. It was kind of his own supernatural ability. He's one of my favorite concepts ever. And after that came Dick Tracy, and then came DC Comics, Detective Comics. You had Superman, Captain America, and Batman. Okay, that's what started this whole thing. It was the detectives, and this idea that people could take matters in their own hands, which is true. We're starting to see that now. And comics exploded during the time of my grandparents. And for me, I've always been into comics. Just from the get-go. Hello, Father. Welcome. I have always been some kind of geek, whether it be gaming or comics or both. But what really got me more interested in the faith, the very, very first thing, before I really started, attaining the sacraments, but when I really considered, maybe I can interact more with God, there's some parallel, it was this idea of heroism in fiction. I just loved that a lot. And, flash forward 10 to 15 years, there is such a thing. In fact, in abundance, sometimes too more than you can handle. Right, Thomas and Father. Sometimes you're like, "What did I sign up for?" But with Superman, who came along, Superman was a product of the science that was exploding, the World War II and World War I science. Nuclear energy was being discovered, and this idea that perhaps someone could have supernatural powers and do good with them. That is what Superman embodied. And then when Silver Age Superman came, he wasn't just a guy who was strong. He also, and I don't know why they started writing this, but maybe it's because he got more popular, and this was still during the time where most people were going to church, and he had to be a moral example. Truth, justice, and the American way. Be kind of saintly in a sense. Um, and still to this day, he's not just strong, but literally he's a very good person. He's a selfless, humble human being. Um, and you just, for me, I look at fiction and I'm like, well, this is just vibing with me. I mean, I look at Jesus and the saints and I'm like, of course there's a connection there. And I always love saying, okay, maybe there's a virtue, and either I can go from either, you know, the originator, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the Holy Trinity, and look at the fictional characters, or vice versa. Sometimes I watch a fictional hero and I'm like, what virtue is that? How can I imitate that? And I don't understand what's going on here. There is a problem, and I'll talk about this when you're talking about having power to change the world. There's always a problem with pride. And I'll talk more about that when I get into more in depth with the superheroes. But I don't think that's most people's problem. I think most people are really, really lazy and out of touch. And it's really stupid to see people make fun of, well, it used to be the case. Now everyone's into superheroes, but it was stupid to see people make fun of those that were into fiction and call us losers and nerds. And now it's like, well, honestly, I think we could use more of this heroism out there. Now, our problem definitely was failing to imitate that, but these were all outlets. Something happened where masculinity and femininity, but especially masculinity, did not become about doing the right thing. When you're raised as a kid, and you guys can fill me in, Father and Thomas, because I know you were probably there when the transition happened. You can't find scripture that says the most important thing is to make money and be successful and look good. If anything, a lot of the New Testament, Jesus says, yeah, most of the things you guys care about is not what I care about. I'm sorry. Of course, we have an obligation to take care of ourselves in money wise, but even with the money, if you make profit, what are you doing with that? Are you giving to the poor? Are you building up people? Are you giving people in your business raises? Are you looking for ways you can give back to those less fortunate? And we were raised in these institutions that have utterly failed us. There's absolutely nothing about, I mean, God is gone. We know that. But even when there was God, it's like there's very little in the CCD and in the educational programs and the bishops and priests, most of them, which says, be a hero, be a saint. That's what a saint is. It's a hero. It's a servant of God who aspires to do the best they can with God's grace. Okay. And yes, if someone is, in my opinion, if someone is not on fire, exciting, even if they're challenging and kind of, rough around the edges, if there's nothing about that person that shines, they claim they're a Christian, unless it's a really bad day. But if there's not a shining light about them, and if there's no good works, then it's very likely we have a serious lukewarm issue. And I think it's time for people to wake up. And yeah, it's stop thinking this is some thing you do when you go to church, and then you go back and maybe you road rage on the way back home, and we're Catholic, we've always been Catholic or Christian or whatever. This is what led to the mess we're in. The lack of heroism in our countries has led to this mess, and people are still going to sit around and raise their kids like none of that matters. when we can see what's happening. There's declining birth rates, there's crime everywhere, there's so much going on. There's corrupt politicians, there's depression, there's suicide, there's drug addiction. And where did all of your corporate make money, what did that do for us? We almost lost everything had a certain someone got into power here in the States. And all those people pushing that button would have been to blame and still are to blame. They're ruining the cities and towns. Well, instead of me ranting at the Antifa kids, I'm just thinking, yeah, well, who put them in power? You know, all these cocky people that said that. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that path too much. um, but I do think that we have to take an ownership that the hero takes, the superhero takes, while at the same time adding the how and the why of Christ. That, I think, is the path to perfection. You know, um, it's you do everything you can while at the same time surrendering to God, because in the end, it's God's grace that really lifts us up. And there are people that are really good and they fall from grace because of their pride, and there are people that start off from dirt nothing. Hopefully, me, God willing, because I'm a pretty big sinner, and God, has pity on them and says, "Okay, well, you want to try, and so I'm going to lift you to a point where you can extend my love to others. As I have forgiven you, you will forgive others, and you will help build up others." Um, and that's the first issue with superheroes. Um, the issue is that they have their own abilities that they're independently working on, right? But everyone else is pretty much helpless. But that's not true in reality. In reality, with God, anyone can make a huge difference. Anyone can make those effects, even bigger effects, because you're saving souls. But anyone can experience that depth of purpose and meaning and heroism if they just open up to God and they're really sincere about it. And this is what happened in schools. Okay, we had because of our, as Pope Benedict called, liquid atheism, um, which means, I believe in God, but does he really care? I don't know, whatever. Kind of, it's almost like the shadow of the Enlightenment. When people were what they call deists, and they believe that God just made the universe, the great architect, and he just made the universe, and he just sits up there and he's like, oh, this is entertaining. He throws popcorn in his mouth and lets us all just squirm around. Well, what happened with this terrible spirituality was, when I went to school, if you weren't a jock or a popular person, you were a loser, you know, just boom, right? And that was all based off of natural talent. And then you'd have to make your own way. And if you're just a cog in the machine, and most people don't want to go to college or be an academic, that's a very specific passion the Lord must give you, in my opinion. This whole college bubble is ridiculous. So, because we didn't really want to go to school or learn all this stuff, and I like history, I am an academic, but there's plenty of people that don't, and it's okay. And so, what do we do with all this this passion that our parents aren't telling us what to do with, and our priests are out to lunch or whatever? Well, you have to find things that are like that in order to take its place. Yes, they became, we kind of idolize these things and people are obsessed with them. But I mean, that's the truth. And so for me, I got into, for the masculine things, what was heavy metal and rock. I enjoyed that. I like my Metallica and 80s rock bands. I thought they were really cool, something aggressive. Comic books, Japanese or otherwise, I would get into that, particularly the Japanese mangas. And that was it. And then even worse, you know, if you're not a jock, you can't get exercise. Everyone needs exercise. Just because you're not a top athlete, which is already ridiculous because only 0.0001% of the people that go into these programs become World Cup or LeBron James athletes. It's insane. And yet sports is the most important thing ever. Sports is basically the superhero for the common man. Let's be real here. It's the same thing. Everyone's watching sports. No one's actually playing the game. They're just rooting on the guy as if like there's some kind of magical force that's going to make them do better. It's ridiculous. I never was into sports. I somewhat enjoy it, but for me, I was just like, it's people getting head injuries and stuff. Like what, and millions of dollars could have gone to something else. Okay, and then even worse, you had the issues of the flesh. It's like, oh, those kids, we all know they're going through puberty and they're going to start liking each other, and that's cool. And teenage pregnancies, that never happens. No, and pornography isn't real. No, that's not a problem. They'll figure it out. They're just kids. And we all know that college parties don't happen. No, they're fine. They're fine. They're fine. That's what happened. I didn't hear anyone say, "Hey, can we have maybe a monthly date night, or maybe I don't know, some kind of dance every week, or maybe one day we want these kids to be moms and dads, maybe a dance at the church, or discussion, or some kind of game or something to rouse the community." That sort of stuff used to happen before the 21st century. That people cared about these things. All the things I'm discussing, people cared about them way more. Now, unfortunately, they were too busy because of they didn't have the air conditioning and inventions that we have of convenience, which only means that we have even less excuse to do this. But this is a complete ball drop. And so and then came in all of these weird, which we'll talk about later on Thomas's Utopiana, weird ideologies. You know, um, uh, there are teachers that were teaching leftism and to hate men. That's the feminism was definitely always mixed in with the socialism. And then so us guys would be like, I didn't do anything to her. Why is she so mad? And the girls were told men are pigs. And as true as that is, often the times, it's not like they said, oh, men can be, dangerous and pervs. They said all men are going to be like some kind of Mad Max rapist people or something. So the women apparently were being fed their own crock of lies. And so they were preying on kids, basically. We were preyed on, maybe not literally a lot of the time, but intellectually, the devil was having his way with us. And it was that or just complete negligence. That's what would generally happen. Now, I went to a private school, okay, and there were some kooks there, and there was some trouble there, okay, because that's just human nature. I've never been to a public school. I can't even imagine the hell it is. I can't imagine. And people still sit around and wonder, well, I don't know why these kids are into all this escapist nonsense and comic books and stuff. They only have to go through literal hell itself till grad school, like, and then get a degree. And then after all of those, you know, daggers stabbed into their souls, and they've been like run through the mill, and they come out like a broken person with all these issues. I just don't know why they can't get it together. I mean, so I see Father made a comment. So thank you, Father. I'm going to read it. Creating and seeking superheroes outside of ourselves, we fail to seek the superhero within, who is Christ residing in our souls. He, through grace, can make us into the heroes we are meant to be. Exactly, Father. So I think that's a good enough intro for now. I'm going to go into the superheroes. I'm going to go for really mainstream ones, okay, so that everyone knows who they are, hopefully. And I'm also going to go into some villains because there's also some misconceptions there. Okay, so first, the first superhero, I'm going to start with Superman. Okay. Now, Superman has a lot to him that is really good. Um, he is. Some people consider him to be a Christ figure. I would kind of disagree with that, but the basis of Superman is, first of all, he has great moral integrity. Okay, that's currently his theme. Because superpowers is like everyone's seen superheroes before. It's not as interesting now. Are more focused on who he is as a person, and Superman embodies to me, and you can look it up, those that are listening. He embodies a good dose of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. If he was a really real person, I would say that person has great fruits of the Holy Spirit. um, he's kind, he's gentle, he's selfless, he's courageous, he's firm. Okay, so that's what you can take from Superman. Now, the part where he can run faster than light, and bullets, he can bounce off them, right? That, of course, isn't happening, but not necessarily. You know, if you look at if you take the superhuman part of Superman and put it on an archangel or God himself or Mary, and you and for me, if you see it in kind of the invisible supernatural way, if you look up miracles like the Battle of Lepanto, or of course the miracles in the Bible, Old and New Testament. But there's also many, mystics that have bilocuted, for example. I was just hearing from the consecration of Saint Joseph, day 4. Another lady who was bilocuting. She's venerable now. She's almost a saint. Or there's like these different levels to become a saint. So she's definitely probably in heaven, but they have to have one more miracle or something. There are amazing superhuman, Samson in the Bible. There that is possible. Plus, a little bit more common. This, for anyone listening, you can look up who the charismatics are. Charismatic gifts are in the Bible. Not everyone has them, uh, in to the point where it's an extraordinary gift. But there's healing, there's tongues, there's counsel and prophecy. Okay, but the main difference between a mystic and a superhero is that it ain't us, right? Um, Saint Paul would never point to himself; he would point to God and all the other saints, and even the Blessed Mother. But the dignity that comes from being a child of God and from being able to do something about the world around you by opening up as a conduit to God. Absolutely. Anyone can do that if their heart is willing. Um, and that is something that I just don't see much of. I just don't. Why don't you see this? I don't see that in many people I run across who are Christian, or any, of course, non-Christians. But it's kind of a shame when you see some non-Christians who are maybe like semi-believers, or pagan or whatever, and they like heroism, and they like become cops and stuff, and they're blowing away people that go to church every day. It should be the other way around. I've got a long way to go, but that should be our aspiration. Another thing about Superman that we need is he does represent in a lot of his feats the perfection of love, which is such an important term. Okay, especially with these darn globalists trying to twist terminology as the left does. No one knows what love is. The beautiful philosophy of love is so important. Eros, filial, agape. That if you don't know what those terms are, these are Greek terms. Okay, there's familial love, there's romantic love, and there's heroic love. And God embodies all three perfectly, infinitely. Now, how could you possibly understand what it's like to follow Christ if you don't understand that? If you see God as love, God is love. But if you see God as love, but you don't understand the how do I put it, the theology and the philosophy behind love, then of course people are wondering, oh, well, where's God? When's God going to show up? I don't really know if there's any God in that Eucharist thing. Well, it's not that they're looking up in the heavens for some kind of, divine. They're probably not even looking for God. They realize they're acting like the pagans. You act like the pagan when you don't seek God in the darkness of faith and through righteousness. That's what the pagans did. They wanted their miracles. They wanted the Hera or Zeus to give them a better job, and those were demons, because all that stuff leads you away from the greatest truth about what makes people happy and at peace, right? It's all empty, and not saying that healings can't happen, but I am saying that this just obsession with God is just like, he's a god, a big old man up there, and he's powerful supposedly. Well, I'm not surprised as to why there's so many agnostics and hidden agnostics in that go to church. I wonder if it's really a lack of intellectual faith as it is a lack of passion. you know why do people not see the passion of Jesus, the passion of God, the cry of the warrior, of the Lion of Judah, the cry to justice and for mercy, you know and of course they're gonna, and then just to mock the whole thing, they're gonna go watch superhero movies. It's ridiculous, right? They're gonna, and I watch superhero movies, but like they obviously put that more than God and video games and stuff, and I'm like, anyway, I've been regurgitating this point many times, but it is a bit annoying the more I think about it. So we're moving on to the next superhero, and it's Batman. Okay, now Batman is the most beloved superhero currently. He's neck and neck with Spider-Man. It's always like one or the other, and they're like always like somewhat one video game or movie comes out and it goes up, and then Batman comes back with his movie and video game and goes up again. So I don't know, but as far as I know, he is the number one. Now, Batman has some good about him, but he actually is further from a Catholic understanding of heroism, and the reason is because Batman represents stoicism. He's a stoic. In fact, currently he doesn't really believe in God. I don't know if that was always the case, but he's definitely a stoic type of guy. Okay, the Stoics were it was a Roman philosophy that came out by a man by the name of Marcus Aurelius, and that's where we got the idea of logos. Welcome, Maria. Good to have you here. The word logos and us using that, we got that from the Stoics. So they believed in right and wrong, and they're very pragmatic people. But the Stoics believed it was all your willpower and your raw talent. Again, Batman represents the the pride of the athlete or the warrior. Only the strongest can really do anything, or the wealthiest. And the guy is actually less realistic than Superman. All right, let's check this out here. First of all, he he doesn't sleep at nighttime. He goes out on his prowling mission, so that's not healthy. Okay. Second of all, the guy, in order to fight without using guns and to be somewhat like the human version of Superman, the guy mastered every martial art in like the world perfectly. Now that's just ridiculous. That's literally impossible. Okay. And also it's overkill, because you really, especially with, unfortunately, some of the guys these days that are walking around, you don't need much to do a lot of damage. Looking at some of these Antifa guys, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if we need Batman here. I think we just need a bunch of angry trucker guys to take their belts off and go to work, honestly. But okay, so there's that. Then of course, I guess it's nice that he doesn't like using guns, he doesn't like hurting anyone, but technically, us Catholics, we don't believe that murdering and, well, not murdering, killing in self-defense or in a just war is a sin. Of course, we want to avoid it. It's a last resort, but if you can't avoid it, that's great, but that's not a sin. And the guy is kind of crazy there. And then he's got like, he has to have all of his money and he has to be like a super scientist and the second most smart person in the entire world to do anything. And the list goes on. And, you know, people love Batman for a different reason. The reason why they like Batman was because Batman, and this I do like about him, he's an imperfect dude. He has these issues. He's broken in his own way. He tries to do good. He doesn't do it perfectly sometimes. And um, even though he's imperfect in terms of his in terms of the fact that he's mentally scarred from stuff, and he also doesn't have superpowers. He does a lot of good, and he's also a little bit more tangible. He's more vulnerable, like we are. And I think the last thing they really like about him is the fact that because he's a human being, he can, he does his push-ups and he gets stronger over time and he learns through experience. So those things that I mentioned, you can also combine that in the blender with Superman. Okay. With the good things of Superman. And I think that also is part of the mystical walk with Christ. Okay. You run into the fact, you have to run into the fact that you're a mortal person with two arms and two legs. You need God's help all the time, and you also have to learn about yourself. You gotta crash. You gotta have some big bicycle accidents like kids do. You have to go to confession if you mess up, if you fall, or sometimes you just get completely beaten up and humbled. So that part of Batman, the imperfection, and he is a sinner too. He's open about his sinfulness. And yet he's still a hero because he's trying. That's also good stuff. But the rest of the stuff about a guy who doesn't get much sleep and it somehow is faster than Usain Bolt and better fire than Bruce Lee and smarter than Einstein. No, that I just have to disagree with the Batman fanboys on that. Okay, so moving on, the next superhero. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments, just let her rip. This is supposed to be kind of an interactive thing. So the third superhero that I personally like the most, and I think is the closest to a Christian saint, would be Spider-Man. Okay, and the reason for that is Spider-Man is, first of all, he's a kid. So he's the unwitting, unlikely hero. He is not a guy that goes out of his way all the time. I'm going to be a superhero and I'm going to do this and that. He's he, oh, Father has a comment here. Did not Batman's hero mission begin out of vengeance for the murder of his parents? Yes, Father. But he, technically, even though he says it's vengeance, they mix up the terms. He technically seeks justice because he doesn't believe in killing. So, the discussion of vengeance versus justice is important. But when they used it for him, when the Dark Knight seeks vengeance, he really isn't seeking vengeance. Vengeance would be to kill someone, unnecessarily. But yes, he did. He did begin out of that. But because it was so emotionally scarring for him, he has this gun phobia and like a few other really big issues. And he himself admits that because it was so emotionally scarring, which is true. That's another thing that can happen. You can have emotional scars as you try to seek redemption. So yeah, that's that's Batman. And I do like that side of him. Okay, so moving on, we have, again, I was talking about Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, he's a kid. Like no one would ever think of Spider-Man. He's literally a kid like me, or was a kid. But he's a guy like me, or the teenagers that are out there, and he goes and he gets bitten by a spider. Okay, and out of nowhere, it's basically like a supernatural experience. It's like, I can do this, I can do that. I don't know what to do. I still got these, daily life struggles, but I can do something. Wow. Now, of course, I have to wear a mask, he said, because I don't want people to find out who I am. Now, that's the one flaw of Spider-Man. He's scared of being found out. But that in of itself, now I don't know if there's any comics that delved into his insecurity, of his identity. I do know that in the movie, Aunt May in the Spider-Man one, which is one of my favorites, the Green Goblin attacks Aunt May, which just shows you why Spider-Man doesn't want to be found out. He doesn't want other people to be hurt, and his loved ones to be hurt, um, in his quest for justice. So he has to wear a Spider-Man mask. But that, I think, is good. And also, he also is human, and he's a sinner too, and he has insecurities and broken. But another thing about Spider-Man that I like is that he's not overly brooding like some of these new heroes on TV and movies are. I am starting to take issue with like these heroes that, like, well, I save the day because I'm a superhero, but like I go out and I womanize and I drink all the time, and like, I have political agendas and stuff. And every time, and I don't want to cast judgment as to why that is, but I do take issue with like this idea of being melancholic and thinking you're strong through that, or thinking, that you can't rise above brokenness into virtue. You can't somewhat reach Superman levels at times. We all have our bad days, but the thing I like about Spider-Man is that, he does hold himself to a standard, even though he falls morally and in his line of work. Another thing I like about Spider-Man is that because he can swing from the walls and goes around the skyscrapers and he can do all these things, most people think he's freaky. They don't like him a lot of the time. It's kind of weird to them. Now, that, I think, also would be the walk of a saint. He's off-putting. They know he's a good person, but he's off-putting. He's firm, but he's humorous. He's courageous, but he can be a klutz sometimes. He can mess up, but it's kind of strange, some of the things he can do. It's not like anything that humanoid because he's part spider. Now that, believe it or not, I think touches into the supernatural life with Christ too. I think that can happen. Even though Jesus is fully God, fully man, he's also the Lord of hosts, and each angel is its own species according to theology, and you got millions of these angels, and then there's 9 choirs, so there's different degrees of glory, and then you have, after that, you have saints mixed in there. I don't know which choirs Saint Francis would be in, but probably pretty high up there. And then you have Saint Joseph, and then you have the Blessed Mother, and then you have Jesus, the Holy Trinity. And just one angel, I mean, like if your guardian angel showed his full power, it would be bad news. We'd probably be paralyzed. Angels, when they show their glory in the Bible, I mean, you're talking, woo! It's like you fall flat on your face and you're scared out of your mind. It's some trans-dimensional stuff, man. And then transfiguration, Jesus shows his divinity. According to more theologians, he was actually holding back. So, it can get very powerful. Now, usually prayer is very subtle, but even in the subtle things, it can be very powerful. There's miracles, of course. There's God's providence, but there's also there's interior miracles, which are the biggest miracles, where like you transform every day into someone new. You're being more patient and kind and gentle and fortitude and loving and hopeful, and it's keep going on the list. And at first you may seem like just a more level-headed person, but eventually people start to take notice and they don't like it that much. Um, or they like it a lot and they're like, hey, this is great. Um, Now, I'm not talking like I'm that kind of person, but I'm definitely talking that's what I see in the Saints. They're definitely human and approachable, but there's something super natural about them where it's like, what? Um, Thomas the Hermit says mystics and saints were persecuted while they were alive. Yes, and that's what Spider-Man often he gets his butt kicked, not only by all these villains, um, but also by people around him. You know, he often gets caught up in the other life, and his girlfriend, she died. One of them died, and he had, his first girlfriend died. His girlfriend or his Aunt May, where were you, Spider-Man? You're a slob. And then, of course, the famous Jonah Jameson. I love the actor that plays him. He gets in trouble with his boss, and he tries all he can, but no matter what happens, he gets persecuted, he gets misunderstood, he gets, sometimes he gets completely rejected. That is another part of the walk. There are dark nights, there are just times where God puts you through stuff, or stuff comes to you. I don't know, maybe it's wherever it's coming from. It's painful, and it's part of the cross. That's another reason why I like Spider-Man. And the last crowning part of Spider-Man, is the arc. Now, the Spider-Man 3 touched on it, uh, but there's a part which many of you that probably aren't into comic books don't know about. There's a part called the Black Suit. There's this alien thing that comes from outer space, and it can mimic people that it comes in contact with, like a parasite. It's like a parasite, and it enhances you, but it makes you more aggressive. And the worse you are, the worse you'll become. Um, and yes, Father David, Spider-Man is suspected by the police a lot of the time. They're never, he gets misunderstood. Sometimes he has to do things that seem illegal, but it makes sense later. And his boss hates Spider-Man, even though he works for his boss. It's humor, is a dark humor there. Um, yeah, Jonah Jameson. But this symbiote comes from outer space, and in one of the story arcs of Spider-Man, he comes in contact with it, and it goes, I don't know, it touches him, it goes into his bag, and it gives him even more strength. It gives him even a new suit, the black Spider-Man suit. And the more he does this, he starts it. He sacrifices his ethics and morality to become more powerful. And I think that is an analogy for sin. Now, I don't know if it was consciously an analogy for sin by Stan Lee, but that is a great analogy of sin. Okay, or a vice, or something. Some sort of, sin is one thing, but like a habitual sin, he gets sucked into it, and soon he starts realizing that he's like, I'm not becoming a hero anymore. I'm becoming a bully who wants. I'm becoming Adolf Hitler. I'm becoming someone that, in my haste to bring about my own understanding of justice, I'm starting to say, hey, the ends justify the means, man. And he starts walking back on his own morality. And at the end, he has to actually pull it off in a dramatic scene. And he goes through withdrawal. So for me, that was like really on the nose as to what that was all about. And I think that speaks to the drug and pornography, and maybe overly doing it with the video games and stuff, which is what's happening. What's happening is, Carl Jung, he had this understanding of animus and anima, right? In men and women, we have a ratio of estrogen and testosterone. And when there's no healthy outlets for the animus and anima, people get consumed they have to find some way to express themselves, especially men. And so now that's why we're seeing all the addictions. I really believe that it's because people don't have an understanding that what I'm seeking is the grace of God and the depth of God and the heroism. I don't understand any of that. So I have to find things that make me feel like a man or make me feel, you know, whatever it is. And then all these things, of course, are unhealthy and they get addicted to them. Um, and for the reasons I discussed in the beginning, that's why it's happening. And for me, as someone who's just as messed up as anyone else and who's doing the mystical walk, I see that Christ, Mary, St. Joseph care so much about these things. And that's part of the healing that goes on. You realize that it isn't just, oh, you're just a stupid escapist. I mean, I am, but it isn't just that. It's like, no, I never knew what to do with myself. I really didn't. I didn't know what to do with the passions. And this is why this Masonic, empty, materialistic way we're raising people is so destructive. It's very sneaky, but it's destructive in the end. It's ultimately destroying souls. And that leads me to the last part of the talk, and it's about villains. Now, this is the other big problem. You see, we had a Trump rally yesterday, and every half the country in the United States hates Donald Trump, and the other half doesn't. Now, the other half that doesn't understands the guy isn't perfect. He even made fun of himself last night, which is really refreshing. He had like the first hour be like a comedy skit because he knows people were probably so stressed out. He probably understands like people are depressed from what's going on, this COVID thing, and then the riots. They probably want to see me joke around a bit. I think that's what he was thinking, which is very good of him. But we know he has a past, We know that he used to be a womanizer, okay? We know that he probably struggles with vanity and maybe temptations of greed, okay? Well, who isn't a sinner? Dang it, okay? But the other side, they have this immature, childish way of looking at good versus evil. They actually think that, and it doesn't surprise me that all these people that mostly hate Donald Trump read garbage fiction like Harry Potter, one of the most overrated series that I've ever read. Where, well, the villain is scary. I talk like this, and I'm obviously evil. He has little black smoke swirling around him. He's like Harry, and he's like Emperor Palpatine or something. They think that's how evil works. I'm like, you guys have terrible. Not only like, of course, there's no spiritual discussions anymore or anything deep, but you have terrible fictional taste. I'm sorry, but you guys have no clue as to how a villain actually works. It is so rare. How can an actual evil guy get someone to do something bad um, by scaring them away? With the exception of like a dictator in like some communist or African country where they already have full power, so they can do whatever they want. Now that side of the devil is there, right? But in mostly everything else, like there's no sense here. It's like, do you actually think that every person that is nice and talks about, oh, we love you so much, we're going to take care of humanity, you actually think that every single person who does that, that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. Read some history, please. Read some history. Most bad people that are successful pretend to be good guys. That's how it always works, right? And it's because Hollywood has made us so stupid and so naive that we think that people like Joe Biden and Hillary are good people because they talk nice. You're silly. You're acting childish if you think that way. You are a sucker of the highest order. Most people do not, that's not how it works. Yeah, Thomas. Yes, it can work that way, but generally when you're not fighting the good fight, he seduces, right? And now there are two villains that I Three villains that I have that can explain how evil actually works. Now, the first one everyone thinks because everyone knows this guy, and it actually isn't that close to how it works. The first one is the Joker, Batman's evil counterpart, arch villain, whatever. Okay, now the Joker is he's like a more glorified, suave serial killer dude. Okay, and I hate this serial killer obsession, and I wonder if it's part of a plan in Hollywood and in comic books where it's like the sadist. Okay, sadists, of course, are evil, but they're so rare. And now everyone always just looks at the TV or whatever, and they're like, "Well, I'm not a serial killer. I'm a perfectly perfect person. I don't do anything." And they focus only on that because it's flashy and any other villain like the Joker, and they think, oh, that's all a bad guy is. Everyone else is cool, man. No one manipulates each other or commits adultery or cheats each other or treats each other or treat people coldly that could indirectly, you know, end up hurting someone very badly, or treating your spouse bad or kids bad, or vice versa, kids to parents. All that stuff doesn't matter as long as you're not a serial killer like the Joker. Now, the new Joker movie, which I really liked, does have an element, and that's what we're going to be discussing more on Utopiana, um, which is this. He's this broken person who takes the dark path of vengeance on the world, and he is a very realistic portrayal of a mental breakdown of someone. Yeah, Tony, that's a whole nother stream and a half. Thank you for talking about the occult there. um, hey, Marcia, good to have you here. Um, but that's not usually what it is. And in the Joker movie, he is like using people's rage, which happens in the end of the movie. And I'm not gonna. I hope I didn't spoil it too much for you guys, but he does do this. The whole socialist dictator thing in the sense where even though he doesn't really care about what they're into, he just wants to see the world burn. Um, so that is one aspect of true evil. Okay. The second person, however, if you've seen the Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter. Now that is getting closer to what I'm talking about. This is a suave. He's messed up, but he's smart. Okay, you may think he's insane. It's questionable. I think he's just into something very sick and pleasurable for him. He's really like the ultimate perv because he's into eating people, and he thinks it makes him powerful. So I really think that's just evil. And if you know anything about shamanism and cannibalism, it's not about, oh, he's crazy. It's like, no, that there is some stuff there that is definitely the evil side of the supernatural spectrum. Um, but that guy is what I'm talking. If you look up clips of Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, he is an example of the charisma and personality of evil. But the last one that I think is the closest, you can not only see him in some of the people that are in particular areas of power, Bill Gates and other people. The last one is Lex Luthor. Lex is like that. Lex is really important because he is a successful, smart, everyone loves him, handsome guy. He's that no one will never know who he is, and he's all about human progress. Oh, I love humanity. Here, have another gadget. Here, I'll give you, just forget about that Superman guy. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom. Oh, I'll advance humanity. But deep down, he's more of a Hannibal Lecter. He really hates everybody. Now, yeah, Lex is a globalist for sure. Okay, and he does great. Why? Because he isn't rough around the edges and telling it like it is. Why would he do that? You know? And that's the problem. People don't think truth or lies. They think, is he nice or is he mean to me? Well, that's what's going to get you killed. Okay? That you have no real common sense here. So if you combine Lex with Hannibal and maybe a bit of the Joker, those elements, there you go. That's what you have. It's someone who's super intelligent, who deep down is a raw animal who hates everyone. Um, and he actually laughs at everyone deep down. He's the one that laughs because he thinks we're disgusting. That's why he likes tempting people with all this and trying to get us mad. He's trying to get us mad and lustful and all the eat the rich and yeah, we're super righteous. Oh, we're a leftist. Yeah, yeah. And or any other instance of pride. He loves that stuff. But deep down he's like, you idiot. I have proven to the Lord, I have proven to Christ that they're nothing but evolved monkeys. They're nothing but fools. Okay? That is what I'm talking about. So I'm out of time here. I try to keep it down to an hour. But I hope that it kind of explains spiritually how I see things through the lens of the mainstream media and sorry, mainstream media. I'm thinking about something else through the lens of fiction. And if only people could transfer all of the beauty they see in these different things, and even stuff like there's some people that aren't into comic books, but stuff like sports and celebrity worship and all these romance novels and stuff that are like everywhere. People need to transfer that energy and need to understand who God is. And the only way to really get there is to surrender to God who speaks in the silence. So if you're encouraged to meet the real deal and to maybe do some good in the world, I suggest that you follow this channel. You join us in morning and evening prayers, and please come out and get involved. So I hope this was a good discussion. God bless. Happy Father's Day. Fathers, become heroic like St. Joseph. Do the St. Joseph consecration. Don't buy what your boss is selling you and all of your previous role models. Oh, it's all about money. No, you can be a hero. You can be a spiritual hero, which is much more important. And don't let anyone let you think that you're just a wuss or a loser like these awful TV shows are peddling. Just put a baseball bat to the TV. These people, oh, the killer dad, psycho dad. Like, oh, please, it's all part of the agenda. So that's it, everybody. God bless, and I'm off, and hope to see you all tonight.